Yeah, happy to. And I think I'll take it from the different angle, right? That being one from infrastructure. So, the need for us to always be connected to some form of electricity, which is obviously a problem in Africa. The second one is access to data. That becomes a huge problem because we have a large underrepresentation of that within the continent. And we know that, like, I think 2% of Africa's health data is actually being captured. So, we have that. And then I think the other aspect of it is probably the computation. So computation speed and computation power, that which needs to drive AI. So if we talk about the long-term usage, AI is great, but what happens when it gets really big really quickly, or what happens when it exponentially grows, right? So those areas are things that I think we would also need to worry about in terms of if we're ready for the next wave of AI in Africa. So slightly different. And then I'd probably add one last thing to this is the whole rights issue. So, which touches on the whole ethical side of it and the framework around that. So, at the end of the day, tech affects all our lives. So, are we comfortable with how it's actually affecting our lives? To what extent do we want it to affect our lives? And, these become critical questions that we need to ask ourselves, ask our family members, our kids, because we've seen things go wrong. So the whole rights issue and the whole framework around ethics becomes a key conversation, right? Because rights in itself is, we can unpack that to so many different areas. One is, can we, give AI itself rights? So that means, can it actually get incorporated? I don't know if everyone here knows the story last year, which kind of made the headline news. There's a AI that has become a CEO of a company. It's a metaverse company, funny enough. And, I think it's Mrs. Yang or Mrs. Tang, something like that, is the name it gave itself. And yeah, so I mean, it's there. So it's becoming more and more integrated. So to what extent do we allow it to actually be part of our lives? And the flip side is true, right? So what human rights are we starting to infringe on, or what human rights do we need to protect? And I'd dive a little bit deeper on that end and say it's even affecting children's rights. And to what extent? I mean, we've seen all the social media platforms that have taken AI to a whole different level, and it's scary. So yeah, infrastructure, rights, connectivity or computation, and data are sort of the areas I'd add onto what Dennis mentioned.
Okay, I just want to chip in some things when it comes to startups in AI in Africa. One of the things that we also need to know is that apart from the fact that there are individuals that are coming into startup, and then we have big techs that are funding startup, there are also non-governmental NGOs, non-governmental organizations, which are NGOs that are beginning to encourage the development of AI in Africa. We have a lot of them, just as I think the next mentioned the Indaba, which is from DeepMind, which is from Instant Deep. We have the DeepMind. We have guys like Sisonke. I know Sisonke Biotech, I think somewhere in Rwanda. We have the DSN in Nigeria, and I'm sure that DSN is in over 10 countries now. So we have non-governmental NGOs, non-governmental organizations that are really supporting that promoting artificial intelligence in Africa. Also, we also have cases of universities that are funding research of AI in Africa. I know of a lot of them. I think Charles mentioned the Kwame Nkrumah University that supports the development of artificial intelligence, and we have several universities too that are involved. And then we have individuals that are funding research in AI. So when we look at funding AI, if you are probably a startup here and you are looking for funding for your AI company, and then probably you've struggled with the big techs, and then you're not getting an edge over it, it's good that you can actually explore other alternatives. And I would also want to add to what Levina, I think Dennis was making a conversation earlier about, policies, AI strategies, helping to promote the adoption of AI in Africa. Most times when it comes to policy and laws, one of the mistakes policymakers might make is when you want to make policies, and then you adopt an already made policy without considering the local, the peculiarities of the country. So which means that if you want to have an AI policy or an AI strategy that is going to be effective in your country, that you want it to be successful, then you must take into cognizance who are the people you are developing this policy for, because over the long run will determine whether it's going to work, or it's just going to be a paper, a paper and pen work, or a toothless bulldog, as some would refer it. So how do you make sure that these policies you're making are such that they conform with the history of the people, they conform with the future, I mean the national aspiration, the national spirit of the people, and how because that will determine how it's going to work, and that will also determine whether it's going to support investment. Because when we say strategy talk about what are the things to consider in the adoption of AI. What is the end of AI? So if you're reading the US strategy, you'll see this an outline, definite strategy. If when you compare it with the China strategy, it is different, even though they all refer to the adoption of AI into their nation. So the same way, when we're looking at the promotion of AI in Africa, we must develop strategies that meet up with the peculiarity, that meet up with the national spirit of our country as Africa. Also, we have, there are instances where most times we look at ethical principles and ethical consideration. I was reading a paper one time, and the person was talking about, ethics as a toothless bulldog, because it just creates principles, and there's no way to enforce it. So, well, because the enforcement of some requirements would actually determine whether AI would be widely accepted, in a country or not. So, if we are having an AI that is, for instance, an AI system that is not transparent enough, you're using it in the healthcare sector, and the AI just comes and just give you results without reasons, and then it's embracing the black box principle. So how do we ensure that people believe enough in this system to adopt it? Because it's not a question of having AI machines, having AI developing several algorithms to solve issues, but the question is, do people really trust this system enough to rely on the decision? So that's why we as much as we are a country, while promoting the usage of AI in the country, must list out those requirements of ethics. At the same time, this ethics must be enshrined in probably a policy brief or in a law, to show that, okay, how do we ensure that people adopt this principle? How do we audit the algorithm to be sure that the algorithm is in conformity with the ethical standards and ethical principle? So I feel that all these are factors that would really affect the quick adoption and acceptance of AI in Africa. I can see that Daisy want to say something about that too.
Yeah, thank you, King, for kicking that. Just two things which I noticed that first, let me just refer to the African Journal that was almost 2 years ago, where they mentioned like why the African policy responses, that is at national, at regional, continental, and international levels, have to ensure that the continent's innovators, entrepreneurs, communities, governments, and other actors are able to reap AI's benefit and mitigate its threats. So sound policy approaches need to enable African nations to build ecosystems that are inclusive, socially beneficial, and adequately integrated with on the ground realities. And that brings me to one important thing, that's the ecosystem. We know in any innovation we have those ecosystems, and who are those involved in the ecosystem, the stakeholders. So if you look at from the inner point where we have those application input, where surrounding that, the primary stakeholders, we know we have those investors, they're very powerful people. We have the clients or the customers we're talking about from the African continent. We have these companies, the employers and vendors. So those have a very huge impact in driving and embracing the AI. Now, the regulators which we talk about, they, as I mentioned earlier about those enablers. So they put the platform for all these primary stakeholders to take place. And then we have this bigger the communities, the competitors, the continental unions that chip in, and these ones, even, well, they're still important, but it draws down to these final. So when we understand that, I think it becomes very easy to see how, and if, I don't know if you have government officials or so, probably that if you look at how these other organizations or governments are moving on, they've put all these into embed, and they can look at it, from a glass and see how things are. And from the content perspective, embracing that, I know we have a long way to go. Earlier alone, I mentioned some statistics where we stand around 50, and which is really pretty good, but we have further steps to move on. Yeah, so let me stop here and leave for other speakers to speak. Thank you.
Okay, so my thoughts would be, first off, what do you think is the greatest concern for AI and its adoption in Africa? From someone who works within the tech media space, I know Tech on Code is also a tech media, AI curating stories and AI telling our stories for us. AI replacing media jobs and media roles. It's one concern for me. I would like to hear from everyone who is in the room too, as it concerns you. And I know we may have thought about, oh wow, what if, ChatGPT or this AI technology will most likely replace this role that is, in this company, or I know we've thought about that. So kindly indicate, we bring you up, and so that you'd share these thoughts with us. And then secondly, really, Lavina, and this is with Lavina, I know South Africa, maybe Egypt too, have an AI strategy. How much of a success has this strategy been? Has it really brought about any sort of good? Is it just, like he said, a toothless bulldog? And then the third would be, how important is it for us to have and use and encourage local capacity when it comes to AI?
Okay, I'm happy to kick things off. So I think from a Africa Union perspective, let's start there. We have, information, or they've had an AI strategy in 2018 that they put forward. We know that certain countries, starting with Mauritius, they were the first off the bat in terms of adopting some form of an AI strategy on the continent. Others then followed suit. Kings and I are actually currently working on the AI strategy for Nigeria. So that's going to be passed really soon. There are tons of activity that's actually happening from a regulation perspective, right? So, there is movement. And, that movement is happening very quick and fast. Yeah, in terms of, being afraid of the whole media space, well, just to put some comfort, Anthony, to you and anyone else in the media space, I think we love human connection. So that's going to be something that's going to be our savior through all of this. However, I do think that the AI within that space is going to help to increase the quality and the standard of content that we generate. It's going to help to automate a lot more so that we could actually then, churn out a lot more content in a very shorter space of time. But then I guess the conundrum comes about in terms of, how much of information is too much, right? So I think I'll just pause there and leave it to everyone else.
Thank you, Lavina. You hit the nail on the head. So I just want to add to that. The truth of the matter is the world is advancing at a very fast rate, and it is not for you to decide whether you want to or you don't want to. You have to keep up with the pace. I mean, you must keep up with the pace. There used to be a time where we had conventional taxis. Now we have things like Uber, right? And it's only the ones that are able to transition to these new models that are able to survive. And now we are seeing Uber also facing some challenges and all that. So I think it's important for people to not see AI as a threat, but rather see it as an help, or as a help rather. Like, you should be able to harness it, and the future is going to favor those that are able to harness the AI tools or the AI development to be able to use it to better produce content, right? You have to be able to use these things. as much as we say AI is very, very catching up and trying to take up people's jobs, it still has some deficiencies in terms of data authenticity. It still has the lack of human connections. You need to be able to add that human touch. You need to be able to use these things. We have platforms like Google, right? In the past, Google was not there. Some 40, 50 years ago, when most of our parents were in school, Google was not there. But nowadays, we are using Google to help us produce better work. And now ChatGPT is coming home to come and improve on this model, right? And we just have to learn to catch up with it. You have to find ways. You have to find ways to harness these tools to be able to better produce content. So basically, I just want to say, you don't see it as a threat, you just see it as a help, as a guide to produce better and quality work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So let me also chip in there. I think, if you go deep down the technical aspect of it, where if we do not understand what's behind the hood, I think it becomes a little bit hard. Being involved in development, being involved in developing, some of whatever algorithms, you find you're using this kind of data, and eventually you want this application to go into use. And frankly speaking, sometimes, for instance, if you consider some KPIs like, let me say, accuracy, that determines what you're working on. And you've trained your model and you got probably 60%, and that is the farthest you could get. But you still go there and put it into use. Now, just by understanding that, it becomes very great, and it brings out where we really can understand what is happening. Talking about the transparency. Is it worth it? Do we have to put some drops on what goes to be used? Earlier on, we mentioned about this ecosystem where the really impactful people are the ones, the clients, who are going to use it. And still, now that is a push. What about the pull from the clients, the customers themselves? So that now, if they are not aware, 2 days ago when I tweeted this, and my sister said, "What is AI?" I was like, "Okay, what is AI?" So this is a layman's, is went to school, but still the struggle. What is AI? What are you talking about? So that is really important as well. We need to create this awareness. And without that, the education, that's why we have this, these other community supports, these other groups that go on sensitizing and creating that. I think that really needs to go at a very high space where people can understand, they're aware of what they're using. And think that's when we're going to really embrace it and see it's being used and benefit from that. Yeah. Let me pause for a while here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to agree with Dennis. I think that was what I was noting down, even when Kings was speaking. I think before we can even start talking about AI being accepted in the community and being accepted for large use, there's a lot of ambiguity with what it even means. I think before you start involving people's acceptance, policymakers and everyone involved actually have to understand it. Policies that are set out should not just be made by, let's say, the engineers. There has to be training, more awareness by policymakers, so that when you're creating these laws and that are guarding AI use in the society, people understand it better, and you can now actually protect the rights that are being abused. The reason why people don't appreciate AI as much, I believe, is because they don't understand it. And what you don't understand, you fear. I think that's just what I want to contribute to what Dennis said.
Yeah, just briefly, thank you everyone for that amazing contribution. I just want to add a couple of concerns, including the ones raised by Tony. So when it comes to AI adoption in Africa, there are a lot of concerns which some of the speakers have mentioned. So one, which is the obvious one, is the ethical and responsible development of some of this technology, right? So we've all had, or we've seen systems or AI systems such as deepfake, right, which are used to portray some people, and of course without their consent and stuff like that. We also have surveillance systems where AI is used to track a particular person, right, just to know what they do. So these are key concerns. And Other concerns that has been raised by some of the speakers include the one of infrastructure and resources. And this is also a hindrance to the adoption of a full adoption of AI in Africa, right? Because we have some African countries with poor internet, for instance. We have light issues, access to computers. Because the important thing about some of these huge AI technology is that they take maybe days or weeks or months of GPU training time. So, for instance, for you to build a robust computer vision technology, right, you have to train the algorithm for a couple of months. Just imagine you don't have constant internet, right, or maybe electricity, for instance. It trips off and then you have to start again, and you repeat that cycle. Another one is the talent. So if we look at some African countries, I think the narrative is changing a lot here in Nigeria, because look 5 years or 6 years back, you have less universities even teaching AI related courses. If you see the computer science students or maybe the engineering students, they have to use things like Fortran, for instance, and some of them have to write them on paper and then submit. So how do you grow when it comes to AI? So that's a big concern, creating talent through education and having a lot of universities. And a huge shout out, just like Kingsley and Dennis has mentioned, to Deep Learning Indaba and Data Science Nigeria, who are really working so hard to enlighten people when it comes to AI and data science in general. Another key concern, again, is that of data quality. So if we see some of the platforms, including our Bureau of Statistics, you see that the data there are outdated. And just like Dennis has said, sometimes if you build a machine learning model or a deep learning model, you have that the accuracy is very low, maybe 60%, 70%, even though, of course, we can agree that accuracy might not necessarily be the best metric to measure some of these projects, right? But it's important to know that some of these things are built on data. So garbage in, garbage out. If you have outdated or incomplete data, you be well to expect like a very, very bad result. And then we have issues of bias and fairness, things like ethnicity, gender, and maybe even race, based on colors and all. So these are some of the key concerns that we have to really iron out in order to have AI being adopted widely. Thank you.
All right, just to add to the conversations we've had, another thing we need to look at when it comes to the encouragement of AI in Africa is that, because we know that data is the building block of artificial intelligence, and we see countries having little or no regulation as to data localization. You find it very difficult to, to most countries don't even know don't have any strategy as to encouraging data silos, having like a data house in their countries. So you find it a very difficult thing when startups are trying to develop solutions for AI, and you see that there is no getting data for the algorithm training. It's very difficult. And the truth is that the greatest fear, in AI per se, might not even be the fear whether AI is going to take over, our job in the nearest future. But the greatest fear would be the discrimination and the falsity these AI machines will generate would occasion that would even cause greater harm. Because this is the issue. Once you are test an ecosystem that you never trained the algorithm with data, obviously what it's going to generate will be bias. There'll be a lot of bias in it. So that would help. That would would see the need why we need to localize the building. The building and development of AI in the African context, and all policies and everything we are doing would be such that would encourage the adoption of such in Africa. So the fear, just to round up, to just conclude everything, is seeing how we can actually encourage. We should not put the fear on whether AI will take up jobs or not. I know that we cannot have 100% accuracy, but I know that we should see how we can encourage the near to perfection in code of these AI machines in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and again, thank you for the information. It's very insightful. That's really a question here. So basically, I hear that we have a few challenges. I mean, the usual electricity, access to data, internet, etc. But could you please recap, maybe as a few bullet points, what are the main issues that need to be solved, and maybe in order of priority? My take will be, I guess, data lake, gathering data, etc. But I'd like to hear your answer.
Okay, so yeah, thank you very much for that amazing question. I think the first key thing to address obviously has to start with the company in development, right? So you have to make sure that first you're creating ethical and responsible AI before creating these systems, right? Then once you've identified what solution you want to build, maybe it's a surveillance system or maybe a traffic management system or whatever, of course you obviously need data to train that. So, and for you to, data doesn't fall from heaven. That means you have to design the architecture. Okay, data lake, data warehouse, how do you extract this data, right? So you have to make sure that these are quality data that you're being generated. And of course, you have to get good talent to really manage this data and build some of this system. So just to answer your question in summary, first, you need to make sure that ethics, you take into consideration the ethics before even designing the system. Then you have to make sure that the infrastructures are there, right? Everything you need are there. So once you address that, you obviously have to design the data pipeline to get quality data, and then you get the people to design the full system.
Okay.
So I don't know if that answers
yeah.
you.
So from what I understand, so you're basically describing a project, but my question was much more at the continental level. So I understand that different countries are at different stages officially. But for example, Ravina, you mentioned that you're working, and other people as well, with the African Union to actually define some guidelines, policies, I guess, etc. And this is where actually I would like to know, let's say that we have investors or we have the government listening to us, what would be your checklist, your wish list to tell them, okay, we need you help or we need the private sector help on these topics in order of priority? What would it be?
Okay, that's an amazing question, and thank you for that. So in terms of priority, I would say first and foremost, it is the governance. So governance of data, governance of the entire flow of information across the continent or across the globe. That is a huge priority. Digital identity is another huge problem. In terms of AI in particular, it's easy to kind of create frameworks for AI or AI ethics or even the applied AI within the continent. But where it kind of really starts to ring true is, again, around, and this is where I probably differ from Charles a little bit. I would say that it's an open source platform. Africa definitely needs, a position where AI can become a lot more decentralized, and that, by that I mean it needs to have access to the mass. How do we do that and how do we accomplish that? It has to be done via an open source platform that is, free of charge, that creates a centralized repository, for example, for a data lake to exist that everyone can then benefit from or of. I think data sovereignty policies is something we have not started tackling, and that becomes a huge key issue in terms of our barrier, in terms of adoption, that is. And I would also say, starting to think about the application rights. So, it's all great and well to say, yes, we're a techie. Yes, the tech can do this. Yes, we created something awesome. But we've got to find a way to find some metrics of where we can start benchmarking, the actual impact. So, prior to the deployment of a solution, we got to be able to have a weighting system, right, of some sort, of some form.
What do you mean by weighting system?
Another area.
What do you mean by weighting system? Sorry.
Yeah, so a weighting system, as in, how many lives does it impact? Is it actually going to be beneficial to a country? Which country is it? Is it going to be beneficial to, for example, solving Africa's food shortage in 7 years, right? So like some form of a weighting system that can help Africa to prioritize where we're supposedly headed towards versus what we can actually start doing to then circumvent that. So I know it was a bit of a long answer with sort of various different aspects that I touched on, but I will pass it on to Miriam.
Good evening, everyone. So, my name is Mariam. I'm a data analyst, currently in the retail space, but I started my career in global public health, and I'm building a machine learning backed solution for global public health, specifically HIV. So, I actually have a question because I'm really new to this. My motivation came from understanding the issues with data quality in healthcare and how I could build a solution or model to solve that using machine learning. So I wanted to ask, what strategies do you think I should take? And just from a builder perspective, how should I frame my mindset around the development of the solution? Because currently I know the problem, I've spoken with certain stakeholders, and I can only think from an engineer perspective. But in terms of framing my mindset around the users, what strategies would you recommend? That's the first thing. And then the other thing I wanted to say, I am the African ambassador for an open source data platform, data science platform. It's called NIME Analytics Platform. We're very new in Africa, but globally we're doing very well. We host summits, events, Data Connect. And so I wanted to also speak here if anyone would like to join our community. All the details are pinned to my Twitter profile. It's a very robust community and we support and appreciate everyone. So thank you.
So I think first and foremost, a huge sort of appreciation for you being in the space and sort of tackling it. I would say, from a product perspective, you got to start thinking about, what is the quickest way to market, and also think about your product design. So, what are the tools that you could utilize that are already available, to actually help you achieve your timelines much quicker and faster. So I would encourage you to probably put down something similar to what we call a roadmap. That roadmap in itself will, kind of factor or focus on maybe three different areas, one being your business, the other being the tech, and the other being people. And what do I mean by that? It's, understanding from a, I guess, tech perspective is the actual technologies and features and functionalities that you can start, adding in and sort of plugging into. And then, from a people perspective, it's understanding who do you need, what partnerships, what sort of requirements, what sort of policies do you need for your staffing, all the sort of admin stuff that kind of go with that. And I would say from a business perspective, it's understanding what your go-to-market strategy is going to look like, what your actual product strategy will look like, what is the runway in terms of investments that you may need, and for how long will that actually take you or sort of keep you afloat. So there's kind of a few different things, but a roadmap kind of gives you a good time frame of saying, well, within the first month I want to achieve ABC, and then within 3 months this, and then 6 months that, and then it kind of keeps you on a sort of more focused sort of approach within a startup. And I've had many startups myself, so I can absolutely vouch for the fact that you can get carried away or you can get very bogged down with details. And I'm sure Chris, being from Founders Family, can also offer some advice with regard to that. But yeah, those are some of the things I would sort of attribute towards. And yeah, just appreciation for the community that you've started and that you're part of. Absolutely love to hear more about it.
Thank you so much. I was just taking notes of some of the things you said. Yeah, I would send you a message about the analytics platform. It's really exciting. Thank you.
I would be interested as well, as Lavina mentioned. I think some of the people, it's interesting to actually give visibility on what is AI, what it can actually, how it can benefit Africa and the different countries. So happy to help as well. Thank Thanks.
All right, thank you. I also wanted to say that we're fully open source. So what Lavina was mentioning about open source, so we have a lot of shared projects on the platform. Right now in Africa, Nigeria is our first location. We have users in Morocco and South Africa. I'm in talks with them to have some of our events in person in some of these locations as well. So possibly I will connect with you guys and then we can have a different space where I can invite the head of evangelism, Rosaria. We're trying to integrate as many people as possible. So it's an exciting opportunity for me to also introduce NIME to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mariam, for let me just
Thank
chip
you.
in there. I think that's really great. I know some guys here in Somi is from Tanzania, and I know Zephaniah, you're really active from the East African part of it, Tanzania. So maybe, Mariam, if you think about the eastern part of Africa, I think probably you can get in touch with Zephaniah or directly, and the fact that we bring about the open space and bring it out there, I think it's really a great thing. I see Aliyah is also here, can also help in that aspect. Yeah, I just wanted to let you know of some people in the space who really can help you push and be in line with what you're working on. But it's really amazing to see that you're working on these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll just follow everyone here. It's not a large space, and then we can connect. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much, Miriam, for that. And thank you, Lavina, Chris, and Dennis for that amazing contribution. So when Miriam was asking the question, something came to mind, like what strategy do you really use to build some of this system? And I think the simple answer for me, or what I adopt in my day-to-day project, is to make use of some of the methodologies available, right? So for instance, you have the AI methodology, and one I find really helpful is the machine learning canvas, right? So in the machine learning canvas, it breaks down your complex project into 10 sub stages. So starting with the value proposition, what exactly you're trying to achieve with the project. And then you have to itemize the data source, right? Where's your data going to come from? Do you need to build an architecture to get those data initially? And then you have to also talk about the type of data, the type of features you need. What kind of machine learning task is it going to be? Is it a reinforcement learning problem? Is it supervised? Is it unsupervised, right? So when you break down these complex stages, when you break down your project into these small stages, it makes it really easy to achieve, and it gives you like a general overview of what is going to look like at the end, because at the end you have the live evaluation and monitoring. Okay, once your project has been deployed, how do you get feedback, right? And how do you implement future changes? I think you can try that out. You can try the CRISP DM methodology as well. So, but I would highly recommend the machine learning canvas.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much.
And then, sorry, I think it's a bit late, but just to maybe chip in a little bit more in Chris' question to me then. So I think I could classify the readiness of these countries in Africa when it comes to AI into maybe 3 stages. So first, obviously, you have to go through the government, and we can call it the governmental pillar if you want. So what you're looking at there is the vision of those governments. Do they have the digital capacity and the required skills, right? And then you have to also take into consideration, which is the second most important aspect, the technology pillar or the technology sector. So what are the innovation capacity? What are the human capacity as well? And then finally, or maybe before the last one, which is the data and infrastructure, you also have to take into consideration the data availability and whether those data, they are representative. And then, of course, you have to look at the infrastructure. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It does very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so Leah and Zephaniah, would like to hear from you. Brief introduction and then your contribution.
Okay, my names are Elia. I'm from Tanzania. I work for Medical Stores Department. It is a government institution that focuses on supplying health commodities to all over the country to focusing on government health facilities. So I'm having some sort of like comments that I want to put out concerning this brilliant and interesting topic. So what I wanted to talk about is I wanted to talk about data. Why data is because the truth is we don't really, and I'm not sure if we really have robust data policies that could favor us as researchers and enthusiasts in the AI field to have a clear path with what we are trying to do with all our innovations and all the ideas that we want to put into this field as Africans. Why am I saying this? As a Tanzanian, we are into digitalization of different processes, different we want to have visibility of a lot of issues that are around us. So we kind of have, as government, they have kind of initiatives that could easy accessing of data that they could not access before. So I find this as a promising future for the AI field because we need to have clear streams of data that could help ensure that we have quality data in the near future. But what are the challenges? So what are the willingness? I was just asking myself some questions here. What is the willingness of these policymakers? Example, the government. Now they have access to data. Are they willing to provide the data to scientists, to people who would want to access the data for innovation? Thinking of Nigeria have had an election some few days back. Are we sure that sort of data that they have from their systems is accurate? What if we want to use them in the near future to produce some works in AI? Are we going to get access to that data? Is it going to be authentic, or could be some cooked data? So another challenge is, I've heard some colleagues here talking about decentralization. I think this is one of the threats to African governments. Carefully look at Americans or any Europeans. They have had data from way long. So when they talk of the decentralization, they still have control of all things around. With Africans and the initiatives of digitalizing systems, they aim to centralize everything and have a clear visibility of things. So when we talk of decentralization, don't we think that is going to be a challenge to get these policymakers to understand what AI is capable of doing? So I'm posting this as a challenge for us to discuss and know how are we going to deal with it as we are to approach government entities and these policymakers towards making sure that AI is accepted by them. Thank you.
All right, so I'll just chip in some few things about some of the concerns that most of us have mentioned concerning making data available and the quality of data for the modeling of an algorithm. The truth is, it might look as though no efforts are being made by most African nations as to making it available. But I believe it's look understood there's no effort, but I know that some efforts are actually being made to get this work. And because I have worked, in some policy areas, especially for the modeling of policy, where we can make data available. Because from my work so far, looking at the data protection laws of countries, because I was currently working on a project on data localization and using some of the laws available in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Tunisia, and then in South Africa. One of the things I realized from the data protection laws is that the regulations of data are actually streamlined to the question of personal data, just protecting those personal data. And we see that there are no, strict laws as to, data in open source, making it available. But I know that there are efforts that are being made to make this available. And those efforts most times are not captured by their data protection laws. But we see some other sectors, encouraging the availability of data. For instance, reading through, I think Kenya, their copyright law, I see how it's encouraged. Most of this data might be in audios, now all those things. How it's encouraged, how those data should be released, and how it should be used. So most times when we are looking at laws that encouraged, and I know that most times also those laws are they're more on papers and usage. But I can tell you that most of those laws most of the governments are actually making efforts to get it to work. So and gradually, I'm sure gradually it's going to spread across Africa. Probably in your country, I can't tell of what the data regime is. But I think what's more effective most times is that when you are looking for data, you must go through the appropriate channel, towards getting it available. So you most times, while most engineers don't get data available, why you don't get data for the modeling of the algorithm is because when you are applying for data, you go through the wrong channel. So I think what's really important when you're trying to model your pipelines, you're trying to build your structures for your project, is to make research on who are the key players in the sectors that will be pivotal in making this data that I want available for the modeling of what I want to do. So I think that would go a long way into helping you generate the kind of data you want. And also, most times also, when engineers are trying to apply for data, you don't give a clear description of what you want to use the data for, because these data are things they're not just things that can easily be released. You must demonstrate what you want to use it for and then the extent of its usage. It must be clear. So all these things are things that will just inform you while you're trying to get data for a project you're working on, and how to get available. So the first thing is to know which stakeholder is the appropriate person to, or the appropriate channel to approach, and the next thing is what is the accurate definition of what you want to use it for, including the limitations and the extent to which the data you're generating, you are requesting for, will be used for. Thank you.
So I think I just want to add on to what you mentioned, Kingsley, and I think it's quite a good sort of segue. So if we look at regulation in general, we've seen regulation first needs to be mandated and legislated, and then it needs to be adopted, right? And it needs to become accessible. Okay, that's across any spectrum in general when we talk about regulations. When we talk about data privacy, what we've seen is data privacy policies were only in 6 countries across Africa. So 6 countries out of 54. This was 3 years ago. Okay, and in the last 3 years, we've managed to ramp that up to a number of about 26 countries across Africa that has some form of a data privacy policy. Okay, so that is the framework to lay down that yes, we can actually work within some boundaries, right? There's this often debate that we have amongst ourselves, between private sector versus public sector versus the digital citizen. Who's actually responsible for data rights? Who owns the data? Why should it exist? And those sort of conversations, right? So a very sort of simplistic way of looking at it is to say that, data privacy is only as good as when it's actually adopted. Right? The adoption rate is where we start holding people accountable. Now, when we start holding people accountable, this can be done by both public sector, private sector, and individuals themselves. So, for example, if we had to start already self-regulating in terms of a self-data audit, now, this is something that would be huge in the space. So, how can we actually start managing the data that we're currently using within our organizations, within me as a digital citizen, within me as a government, and the rest of it, right? I get your point in terms of saying that governments aren't very favorable towards a decentralized platform of AI. Absolutely, 100%. However, saying that, they're also starting to see the benefits of a blockchain environment which encourages decentralization. they're also going towards a point where society is forcing them to say, give back the power to the people. Okay, so you have that nuance that kind of is starting to apply some form of pressure. When we have to, talk about, how do we get governments or regulations to actually start, enforcing these things? So I'll give you an example, and I can only do it from a South African perspective. So we have, something called POPI or Papaya. That's basically the Privacy Protection of Personal Information Act, and that is your data privacy, right? I think Nigeria has one called the NDPR, which is similar to Britain, the GDPR. Okay, so all of them basically follow some similar stance. South Africa has probably 2 extra layers to the sort of baseline model of GDPR, right? But again, we've had a committee, for example, that's been placed together to mandate and to regulate and to hold people accountable. This has been in effect maybe for about 6 years or so. And to date, it has, again, not been as effective as it could be. Okay. So again, it's regulation may be there, but what do we want to do with it? That's the one part. And then just to answer your question around the whole AI portion, this is where I believe synthetic data and, that generation of synthetic data is going to play a huge role, right? Because if we don't have access to data, how can we start generating information? How can we start testing to the degrees that we need to? So this is, again, a place where if you have an open source platform that is accessible for large volumes of data to kind of exist in terms of a data lake of some sort, with the likelihood of things like synthetic data being generated, that's going to add a lot more value, and it's going to allow for a lot more startups in the space to go to market much quicker and faster. Right? Because at the end of the day, it's about accessibility and it's about the testing of your actual solution. So I would say that, similarly to the way that, when we programmed in languages, right, we started off with like hard coding to hardwares, and then we gravitated into object orientated, and then we gravitated now into, the world of Python and, the rest of it. Similarly, we've gone down the road of things like, low code, no code. Okay. So, if we follow that to the same sort of nuance with data, we're going to see the similar sort of patterns emerge. So I love the questions, because I could probably, as you can tell, talk about it for a bit of a time. But it is something that I absolutely appreciate you bringing up.
It's really interesting contribution, Lavina. And I was just reading a few reports here, and so which is going on the continent where we have this cross-border data. Just to get a little bit step back, we've seen that companies that maybe originated in country XYZ, and now they are moving to WP, and so now what happens there? This is the same platform which is used on, it's benefiting the people on the country, Tanzania, and now they want to extend to Nigeria. So what happens there? I think that's when the cross-border data comes in, and that, trust me, we know that it's very impactful. Without setting those clear governance, without setting those clear policies on how data needs to move and how it needs to be managed or controlled, we're going to struggle. And because, look, what chips into, because at the end of the day, we need to put in this data into these modules, these algorithms. You mentioned something about, synthetic data. Well, it's really interesting, but we know, speaking from the real data centric point of view, of where we are more concerned about the data instead of just the models, and we know that has a very huge impact. So it's something which it's inevitable. But now I think that's when we talk about how responsible the companies, the government, and the people themselves. You've touched on all that. I think maybe Lavina could probably brief on what we've been working on, the responsible work, and how we visualize it. I think that's why we even have this space, and onwards, we're going to have such kind of space. And I think, just to hint, we're about to release a report on these, these coded rights. So yeah, let me just stop here, and I know we're probably wrapping up. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you very much for joining in and sharing all our thoughts. I know there's some persons who are just joining us, and I would just want us to end our thoughts with how we can build responsible AI tech, especially the ones that respect human rights and the ones that ensure that humans, all of us, are the goal of building such AI technologies, designing such AI technologies. I know that Adi can speak to the biases that may have to do with gender equality and children's rights. And also, if anyone wants to join in to maybe also finally share some thoughts on how to ensure that together, not just in silos, but together on the continent, we're working together to bring about all of these things that we've spoken about, and come back in a few months, a few years' time to say, yes, we've actually done this together. So this would be final statements and final contributions.
Just tying in everything that's been said, because it's already been spoken by the different speakers. I think AI is here to stay. AI has its many benefits. It helps with work, it helps with healthcare and all these other things. But just as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of worry about data privacy, children's data.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'm Dr. Pius. I'm a professor in a university. I would like to say something there with respect to how data becomes available. I think we need to learn from different fronts. One is the fact that service providers have really exposed a lot of data to the world. So we have the so-called big techs that have engineered some services that led to massive amount of data being available, but we find ourselves somehow trying to tap into their data, which they have accumulated through services. And I hear people talk a lot about government providing data. The government also has their own services and they generate data, and you can be sure that they are going to guard the data. I think that where the world is going, if you ask me, we cannot remove the decentralized architecture from the harnessing of data, because the users actually generate data through their footprints. So what people many times are not really worried so much about their data being out there. They want to have some control. I think that's really, so we need to design new service systems that will simultaneously provide some services to users and also guarantee that they have a certain level of ownership for their data and that they can actually monetize our ownership. This is where I think we can have huge platforms of data where the owners of data are the people that actually generated the data. And through, for example, tokenomics, which can be very fine-grained, people can actually earn from other people using their data. So I think there has to be a kind of economic model for handling data, economic model for incentivizing provision of data. So we cannot detach that from here. And I think that the solution will be heavily skewed towards decentralized platforms. We need to use, for example, IPFS. We need to do a lot of research really on that platform to see how it can become the leverage really for harnessing data in a comfortable way for many people. Thank you. So for now, I hope that you were hearing me. You never know when the...
Yes, we heard you.
I can summarize a little bit if you want. What I was essentially saying is that it's data, guardian of data. We shouldn't just be looking at central bodies alone.
governments through policies, their provision, but the individuals at the end need to be empowered to be given a guarantee that they own their data and they guide their data and they can benefit from their data. So services that really provide that guarantee on the long run will ensure that a lot of data will be available to the world. When people complain about privacy, sometimes it's not so much because they want their data to be private. They just want access to their data, okay, to be something beneficial to them. That's really so that economic model needs to be put in place, and it requires a lot of innovation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So closing statement.
Okay. I just wanted to, touch on something. I think I saw Philip sort of put into the chat thread, which is something that we probably didn't touch on much, which is the information dispensation, right? Which is the misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, right? And that's probably a topic that we can cover at some point. But I think, from my closing perspective, as much as we sit with so much of possibilities, it's the applications that count. It's the impact that we make. And, let's probably take this moment in time, okay, that we have to really start embracing our future. That future could include technology. It could include the future of what humanity may look like. But we need to start embracing that, and at the same time, we need to really invest in ourselves, invest in humanity as a whole, because, if we do it in isolation, we're going to probably find ourselves in a conundrum of sorts, right? So man is becoming more machine is becoming more man. So, again, we have choices, and let's just be very conscious of those choices whenever we make them.
Okay, thank you very much, Lavina. So I think that's how we're going to wrap up. I hope everyone can hear me. We've overspent or overshot the time. Okay, and thank you very much. I think we may need to do a part 2 and maybe keep this running, say, every week.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Anthony. So, we have a room of speakers here that have been rather dedicated to this cause. It's been months in the making. And it's a report that we've called Coded Rights, and it's something Dennis alluded to earlier on. And I think I gave a bit of a teaser in one of my LinkedIn posts yesterday, which I apologize for. But, it's a culmination of a report that we literally took the applications across Africa, across all the different sectors of AI, and we've put together. It's quite a comprehensive document, and we hope that it's going to add value in terms of, helping everyone navigate the waters a little bit better. And yeah, we hope that, and we welcome anyone that wants to contribute to any of our future sort of reports that we're going to be putting out, because we plan to do this on a quarterly basis. And we really want to create that open community for everyone here to be able to contribute, whether you're a researcher, whether you're a startup, whether you're a technologist, whether you're just someone in mainstream, it's really open to everyone, and it's open to all organizations within the African continent. And yeah, we really look forward to your feedback as well in terms of that report.
Thank you very much. So please reach out to Lavina or at Africa Tech Radio. So thank you very much.